It was December 3rd, 1996. Across the UK, millions were glued to their screens, watching a battered young woman with a shiner and fresh sutures above her eye, weeping openly on live TV. This was Tracy Andrews. Gripping the hands of her late partner's grieving relatives, she recounted a horrific ordeal that supposedly happened 48 hours earlier on a lonely rural road. She claimed a wild-eyed maniac had slaughtered the love of her life, Lee Harvey. A violent driver was roaming free somewhere in England. The nation's heart broke for her, while authorities kicked off a gigantic search for a specific car and the killer inside it. People from all over the area called in, eager to help nail the brute responsible for the slaying. However, Tracy's tale had some serious holes in it. Ironically, that televised plea for justice would ultimately be the very thing that destroyed her. You see, two finance professionals happened to take that exact route that evening. Their testimony, specifically regarding what was missing from the scene, would expose one of the UK's most infamous fabrications. Strapped in for the UK's grimmest tales? Check out our latest release, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 brutal cases guaranteed to terrify you. Grab the paperback or Kindle version on Amazon, or download the PDF directly from us. Links below. Don't sleep on this. Buy it now. Okay, back to the story. Lee Raymond Dean Harvey was born in 1971, amidst the tranquil scenery of Worcestershire. The rolling green, hills, and historic West Midlands market towns provided the setting for his early years. It was a place of twisting, rural roads, cozy taverns with warm hearths, and tight communities where neighbors knew everything about each other. Lee enjoyed a classic British upbringing alongside his folks, Ray and Maureen, and his sister, Michelle. They were a solid, blue-collar household, deeply rooted in local traditions and respectability. Everyone agreed Lee was just a regular guy leading a standard life in the heart of the country. There was zero drama surrounding him, and absolutely no warning signs of the bizarre tragedy coming his way. He earned his keep driving buses, steering through the very streets he grew up on. Day in and day out, he shuttled locals across the towns and hamlets he knew by heart, passing the identical pastures and hedgerows he'd seen his whole life. Although legal records would eventually list him as jobless when he died, his time behind the wheel gave him an intimate knowledge of the area, including Cooper's Hill, the exact spot where he'd take his final breath. At 25, the guy had a bright future. He was youthful and optimistic, engaged to a woman he adored. His aspirations went far beyond the local countryside boundaries. He wanted to settle down and raise kids. Sadly, none of those plans would ever happen. Everything was cut short one freezing December evening on a desolate road, miles from help. Tracy Marguerite Andrews hailed from the Hereford and Worcester region, just a stone's throw from Lee's childhood home. Her early years were defined by instability. Her folks split early on, leaving her in a house shared with her mom, her stepdad Alan Carter, and a mix of siblings. This chaotic environment would mold her character in ways that wouldn't surface until much later. As a teen, Tracy chased a glitzy lifestyle that clashed with her humble roots. She tried her hand at modeling and sold beauty products, carefully curating a vibe of class and elegance. Even as a kid, Tracy grasped the value of appearances and controlling her public image. However, behind that polished mask, her private life was a wreck. She fell pregnant at 21 with her first serious partner, Andrew Tilston. The romance crumbled under the stress of raising a newborn. Roughly 12 months after their daughter Carla arrived, Tracy was back living with her mom, navigating single parenthood. She eventually managed to get a public housing unit in Alvechurch, a spot south of Birmingham, to raise the girl on her own. It was a tough grind, being a solo mom in a tiny town with little money. Yet, Tracy pushed through, keeping up her looks and her dreams, convinced that a better life was waiting. Her split from Andrew Tilston was messy and toxic. He'd eventually inform investigators that during their relationship, she actually pulled a knife on him, a detail that seemed small back then, but would gain massive importance down the road. Lee Harvey crossed paths with Tracy Andrews in October 1994. From the moment they locked eyes, the chemistry was explosive, a total whirlwind of magnetic attraction. Lee looked at her and saw the total package. Gorgeous, sharp, and driven to succeed. For Tracy, Lee represented a rock, the kind of steady, loyal partner who could give her the picket fence life she craved. Things moved at warp speed. Within 3 months, Lee was already unpacking his boxes in her flat in Alvechurch. To the rest of the world, they were the picture-perfect couple. They got engaged, and Lee stepped up, happily playing dad to her little girl, Carla. But once the front door closed, that perfect image shattered. People close to them saw the ugly truth, a toxic cocktail of jealousy, screaming matches, and terrifying violence. It was a revolving door of breakups and makeups, where the passion of their reunions matched the ferocity of their fights. Love and hate lived under the same roof, feeding off each other in a sick cycle. The smallest things would set off World War III: a glance at someone else, a perceived insult, old grudges. Jealousy was the rot at the core of their bond. It became their twisted routine: scream, fight, explode, then cry, and make up. That was the heartbeat of their life together. The physical abuse was escalating and scary. Stories started circulating about nasty brawls. Tracy supposedly bit Lee on the neck during a blowout, leaving a scar. Another time, she lashed out and hit him. Their relationship was a ticking time bomb, and everyone watching was just waiting for the boom. The red flags were everywhere. Friends and family watched in horror as things got darker. But Lee Harvey? He wouldn't let go. He loved Tracy with a blindness that kept him standing on the train tracks even as the train was coming. Maybe he thought he could fix her. Maybe he just couldn't face being alone. That loyalty, that refusal to run when every alarm bell was ringing, was about to cost him everything he had. The night of December 1st, 1996, started out normal enough. They headed to the Marlbrook, a local pub in Bromsgrove, just grabbing a drink to blow off some steam. For an hour or two, the drama seemed to be on pause. It was a chilly Sunday night, Christmas just around the corner. They headed out a little after 10 o'clock. Deep winter darkness had settled over Worcestershire, the kind of pitch black you only get in the countryside. Lee was behind the wheel, Tracy riding shotgun, cruising back toward Alvechurch. They took the route along Cooper's Hill, a quiet, winding country lane Lee knew like the back of his hand from his bus driving days. That stretch of asphalt was about to become the center of a national media storm. Nobody knows exactly what words were exchanged in that car, or the exact second love turned lethal. Those secrets died with Lee. But one thing is stone-cold fact. Somewhere on that hill, the car pulled over. A fight broke out, and minutes later, the 25-year-old was dead, stabbed more than 30 times. Some reports say 37 separate wounds. It was a frenzy. Face, neck, chest, everywhere. One slice to the neck hit an artery, spraying blood into the freezing night. He bled out right there on the tarmac, miles from anyone who could have helped him. Tracy Andrews walked away with a black eye and some cuts, and she had one hell of a story ready. She spun a tale about road rage, said the nightmare started right after they left the pub. A dark Ford Sierra supposedly came out of nowhere, driving like a maniac behind them. She claimed the driver was tailgating them, flashing high beams, leaning on the horn, trying to run them off the road. According to her, Lee did the sensible thing and pulled over to let the guy pass. But the Sierra didn't pass. It stopped. A passenger jumped out. A guy with staring eyes, looking totally unhinged. She said he started screaming at Lee. Then, chaos. Tracy claimed this stranger just snapped. Said he pulled a knife and butchered Lee while she sat, frozen in the passenger seat, too terrified to move. When it was over, the killer hopped back in the Sierra and peeled out, leaving Lee dying in the dirt. Tracy called 999, sobbing hysterically. When the paramedics got there, Lee Harvey was gone, his life pooled on the cold ground. And just like that, the manhunt for the road rage killer was on. 2 days later, following a brutal slaying, Tracy Andrews stepped into the media spotlight for what would become one of the most infamous press events in British crime history. She looked like a wreck. Her eye was swollen shut and black, fresh stitches lined her forehead, and her skin was pale with shock. Flanking her were Maureen and Michelle Harvey, the mother and sister of the victim. They clasped hands, a portrait of shared grief, family unity against the nightmare scenario. Tracy's plea was tearful, specific, and sounded completely genuine. She talked about the killer's cold, dead eyes. She pleaded for the driver of that Ford Sierra to show himself, claiming he wasn't at fault. She spun a tale of wrong place, wrong time. Two lovers ripped apart by a stranger's sudden madness. The performance worked perfectly. The story was front-page news everywhere for days. The concept of road rage had already struck a nerve with the public. Violent drivers were the boogeymen of the media throughout the 1990s. Anyone who had ever been cut off in traffic could picture themselves in Lee Harvey's shoes. Tracy fed right into that fear of monsters lurking on the motorway. The cops went into overdrive. They begged the public for leads on that mysterious dark car. Sketches were everywhere. The phones didn't stop ringing. People called in, but their info didn't back up Tracy's fable. In fact, it blew the whole thing apart. Detective Inspector Steve Walters was running the show for the West Mercia force. From the jump, something about the widow's tale felt off to the veteran cop. The pieces didn't fit, but the real break came from the public. After that TV spot aired, Simon Baker and Elaine Kurthers got in touch. They were accountants driving that exact stretch on December 1st. Their story torched Tracy's timeline. They had spotted Lee's vehicle on Cooper's Hill that night. They watched it back up and pull over, just like Tracy described. That part was true. But then came the smoking gun. After passing the parked car, Baker and Kurthers drove for miles without seeing a soul. No phantom Ford, no getaway car, no maniac fleeing the scene. If she wasn't lying, they would have passed the killer. The math was bulletproof. On a narrow lane with that timing, a car couldn't just vanish. They didn't see the Sierra because it wasn't there. It was a ghost story made up by a killer. Then came more bad news for Tracy. A kid living nearby heard shouting, but only 2 people, not a gang of road rage psychos. And one of those voices was definitely female. The walls were closing in. While witnesses chipped away at the lies, science landed the knockout punch. Forensics went over Tracy's clothes with a fine-tooth comb. She swore she sat in the car while Lee got jumped outside. Just a helpless bystander. The blood stains said otherwise. The DNA map couldn't be argued with. The spray proved she was right next to him when his jugular opened up. She was within striking distance when he died. You can't lie to physics. Tests showed most of the blood was at the back of the car, nowhere near where she claimed the fight happened. The hard evidence put her right in the middle of it. Then there was the hair. Police found nearly 100 strands of Tracy's locks near the body, ripped from her scalp during a brawl. More clumps were tangled in Lee's own fingers. In his last moments, dying on the roadside, Lee had clawed at his killer. He fought back, tearing hair from Tracy Andrews' head. He pointed the finger from beyond the grave. But where was the knife? Lee was stabbed over 30 times, yet the blade was missing. Detectives found the answer in a crazy spot. Inside her shoe, inside her ankle boot was a telltale blood smear. The outline matched a Swiss Army knife perfectly. She had stashed the weapon in her boot seconds after the murder. She walked around with it hidden while the ambulance crew tried to save him, frantically performing CPR on a corpse while officers took down her first statement. Later, detectives realized she had ditched the murder weapon in a hospital trash can while getting patched up. Those cuts on her? She got them because Lee was fighting for his life. She tried to pass those wounds off as proof of the attacks she supposedly watched. But the physical proof told a different story. The road rage maniac didn't exist. There was no phantom Ford Sierra. There was no guy with staring eyes. It was just Tracy and Lee alone on that pitch-black back road. As the police net tightened, Tracy cracked and collapsed at her parents' house, ending up in the hospital after an apparent overdose. On December 19, 1996, authorities officially slapped her with a murder charge. The next day, she stood in front of a judge. In a move that shocked everyone, the court let her out on bail, on the condition she stay with her mom and dad. Prosecutors fought it, but on December 23rd, a judge upheld the ruling. Tracy got to spend Christmas at home. As the legal battle geared up, the state laid out their version of events. This wasn't random road. It was a domestic execution, the final explosion of a toxic romance. On December 1st, a fight had broken out, allegedly over a gag gift, a black beanie. Tempers flared, and Tracy, completely losing it, grabbed a blade and stabbed her future husband over 30 times. The trial kicked off at Birmingham Crown Court in the summer of 1997. Leading the prosecution, David Krigman QC laid out a roadmap of guilt built on witnesses, science, and the holes in Tracy's own story. The case against her was absolute destruction. People driving that route saw nothing. Blood spatter put Tracy right next to the stabbing. They found her hair ripped out at the scene and blood inside her boot where she hid the knife. Piece by piece, the state tore her fairy tale apart. Her legal team stuck to the script. She was innocent. The mystery killer was real, but the mountain of proof was too high to climb. On July 29, 1997, the jury came back with a guilty verdict. Justice Buckley handed her a life sentence, ordering she serve at least 14 years. Up in the gallery, Lee's parents, Ray and Maureen, sat with their daughter Michelle, watching the gavel come down. Ray later told the press they felt vindicated, but as he put it, a court ruling doesn't bring your boy back home. For the Harvey family, the nightmare wasn't ending. They had to sit there while their son's messy private life was picked apart, hear every gruesome detail of his end, and accept that the woman Maureen once held hands with on TV was the one who butchered him. In '98, Tracy tried to fight the conviction, claiming the media circus made a fair trial impossible. By October '98, the court shot that down. She was staying locked up. Then, in April '99, the story took a wild turn. A newspaper ran a letter Tracy wrote from her cell. In black and white, she finally admitted what the forensics already knew. She was the one who killed Lee Harvey. One line in that letter summed it all up. "I just lost control." After years of playing the victim, after spinning elaborate yarns about mystery attackers and dragging Lee's family through hell, Tracy Andrews finally came clean. She had stabbed her fiancé to death on a Worcestershire lane. She tried to spin it as self-defense later, but detectives weren't buying it, pointing out she kept stabbing him while he was backing away. That's not defense, that's hunting someone down. Tracy did her time in the British system, eventually moving to Askham Grange, an open prison in Yorkshire. By 2010, she was getting day passes to go shopping in York to prepare for release. When the public found out, people were furious. Maureen Harvey, still broken by her son's murder and the betrayal by the woman she once comforted, called it absolutely traumatizing. Rumors started flying that Tracy got plastic surgery to fix her jaw and changed her name to Tia Carter. In July 2011, after doing about 14 years, she walked free. She got a fresh start with a new face. Lee Harvey stayed in the ground, forever 25. He never got the life he was supposed to have. The Tracy Andrews saga became a defining moment in British crime, and not just because of the blood and guts. It was a case that hooked the whole country, forcing a hard look at how we treat criminals and victims, leaving a scar on everyone involved. It happened right when road rage was the hot new panic in the media. Tracy tapped into that fear, selling a story that confirmed everyone's worst nightmares about driving in Britain. The fact that she made the whole thing up makes it that much more twisted. It showed how dangerous a media plea can be. Tracy's tearful performance on live TV that press conference was a calculated move to harvest sympathy and solidify her fairy tale. Instead, it acted as a beacon for the very witnesses who would dismantle her story piece by piece. The media spotlight she craved became the glare of interrogation that exposed her, and the entire inquiry stands as a testament to the absolute certainty of forensics. The blood patterns, the hair samples, the hidden stains on her footwear, these silent accusers revealed the grim reality Tracy fought to bury. No amount of fake tears or dramatic acting could argue with the physics of what actually went down on Cooper Hill. Lee Harvey was only 25 at the time of his death, an average young man whose only fatal error was trusting a partner capable of the unthinkable. His loved ones have borne that weight for years, their pain sharpened by the cruel charade she played in the aftermath. That man with the staring eyes she described, he never breathed. He was a monster made of smoke, conjured up by the woman holding the knife. The true monster was standing right in front of the press. It was Tracy who looked into the lens without flinching and spun a web of lies. She watched Lee's mother break down in agony, knowing full well she was the architect of that sorrow. The courts gave Tracy a life sentence, but for Lee's family, there is no such thing as time served. Some voids are too deep to fill. Some things, once broken, stay broken. Treachery like that leaves a permanent mark. Somewhere out there in Britain, disguised by a new name and a reconstructed face, she is free, forever shadowed by the brutal truth of what transpired on that lonely road in December 1996.